I bet you didn't know a house could hold its breath. The camera drifted slowly, almost reluctantly, across the room. Furniture draped in white sheets loomed like phantoms. Cobwebs clung to the shadows in the corners. It was a house holding its breath, waiting for something long forgotten to return. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp wood and mildew. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under the camera's steady gaze. Time seemed to stand still, trapped within the walls of the old house like a fly in amber. The silence was unsettling, pregnant with unspoken secrets. The camera paused at the entrance to a hallway, darkness swallowing the far end. A faint scratching sound echoed from within like claws on wood. The shot lingered for a beat, then slowly faded to black. I bet you didn't know how unsettling an old photograph can be. Lydia sat at the dusty kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined an old photograph. Her fingers traced the faded faces, their smiles lost to time. A chill ran down her spine, a prickle of unease that she couldn't shake off. Why did this house, this photo, fill her with such a deep sense of wrongness? A floorboard creaked somewhere in the depths of the house. Lydia's head snapped up, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Hello?" she called out, her voice thin and reedy in the oppressive silence. Only the echo of her own voice answered her. A shiver ran down her spine. "Just the house settling," she murmured, trying to convince herself. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to coil around the edges of her thoughts. "You don't belong here," it hissed. "Remember, you need to watch this if you struggle with sleepless nights." Lydia lay in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, a suffocating blanket of dread. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't control, each one more terrifying than the last. Sleep was a distant country she could no longer reach. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected between her and the peaceful oblivion she so desperately craved. She tossed and turned, but no position brought comfort. The shadows in the room seemed to writhe and twist in the darkness. They took on shapes and forms that defied logic, morphing into grotesque figures that danced on the walls. Lydia's imagination ran wild, each shadow a potential threat. A child's giggle, high and thin, sliced through the stillness. It was a sound that didn't belong, a jarring intrusion into the quiet of the night. The giggle was innocent yet sinister, sending chills down Lydia's spine. Lydia sat bolt upright, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of panic. She strained her ears, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the darkness offered no answers. The giggle came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of small footsteps padding across the wooden floor. The footsteps were light, almost playful, but they carried an ominous weight that made Lydia's skin crawl. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her like a shard of ice. It was a primal fear, one that gripped her entire being and refused to let go. She felt paralyzed, unable to move or even think clearly. She scrambled out of bed and rushed to the window. Her movements were frantic, driven by a desperate need to escape the unseen terror that seemed to close in around her. She fumbled with the curtains, her hands shaking. A thick layer of condensation clung to the glass, blurring the moonlit landscape outside. The world beyond the window seemed distant and unreachable, a hazy dream that offered no solace. And there, etched into the fog, was a single small handprint, a child's handprint. It was impossibly clear, as if the child had just pressed their hand against the glass. The sight of it filled Lydia with a new wave of terror. Lydia stood frozen, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the handprint, her mind racing with questions and fears. Who had left it, and why? Someone or something was watching her. She could feel its gaze, a heavy, oppressive presence that made her skin crawl. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in as the terror mounted. Lydia knew she wasn't alone, and that realization was the most terrifying of all. I don't think people understand the depth of fear that can consume someone. Ben's voice was laced with concern as he placed a cup of coffee in front of Lydia. He had noticed the changes in her over the past few weeks, the way her once bright eyes had dulled and the energy she used to radiate had all but disappeared. The morning light did little to chase away the shadows that clung to her. The kitchen, usually a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold and uninviting. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn and pale. It was as if the life had been drained from her, leaving behind a shell of the woman she once was. She hadn't slept a wink. Night after night she lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control, her body refusing to find rest. Lydia forced a smile, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the coffee. She hoped the warmth of the drink would bring some comfort, some semblance of normalcy. "Just a bit tired," she mumbled, avoiding his gaze. She didn't want him to see the fear in her eyes, the fear that had taken root deep within her. She knew he didn't believe her. The doubt was clear in his eyes, and it only added to her growing sense of unease. The nightmares were becoming more vivid, more real. Each night they grew in intensity, leaving her shaken and disoriented. And the whispers, they seemed to be getting louder, more insistent. They followed her everywhere, a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. "Lydia," Ben's voice was soft but firm. "Something's wrong." He had tried to be patient, to give her space, but he couldn't ignore the changes any longer. "You can talk to me." He wanted to help, to understand what was happening to her, but he felt helpless, unable to reach her. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a gesture meant to be reassuring. He hoped the touch would bridge the gap that had grown between them. But Lydia flinched at his touch, a jolt of fear shooting through her. It was as if his touch had burned her and she recoiled instinctively. What was happening to her? She felt like she was losing her grip on reality, the line between dreams and waking life blurring more each day. The fear was consuming her, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. "This is gonna blow your mind." The door creaked open, releasing a musty odor that made Lydia's stomach churn. The smell was a mix of mildew and something else, something that hinted at years of neglect and forgotten memories. She hesitated for a moment, her hand lingering on the door handle before taking a deep breath and stepping inside. Cobwebs brushed against her face as she descended the creaking wooden stairs, each step taking her further into the cold, damp embrace of the basement. The wood groaned under her weight, as if protesting her intrusion. She could feel the chill seeping through her shoes, the air growing colder with each step. The basement seemed to swallow the light, leaving only shadows and the faint outline of old, forgotten furniture. A single bare bulb cast long, grotesque shadows that danced on the damp stone walls. The light flickered, threatening to plunge her into complete darkness. She reached out to steady herself, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface of the wall. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, twisting and contorting into shapes that made her heart race. A cold draft swirled around her ankles, raising goosebumps on her skin. It felt as if icy fingers were wrapping around her legs, pulling her deeper into the basement's depths. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself in a futile attempt to ward off the cold. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, as if an unseen presence was watching her every move. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the basement remained empty. The feeling of being watched was almost palpable, a weight pressing down on her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. A child's voice, barely a whisper, seemed to emanate from the shadows. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the creaking of the house, but it sent a chill down her spine. "Lydia!" the voice called, soft and haunting. She strained to hear more, but the voice faded into the background, leaving her with only the echo of her own breathing. "Lydia," it called, drawing her deeper into the darkness. She felt an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to follow the voice. Her feet moved almost of their own accord, carrying her further into the basement's depths. The darkness seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in as the voice grew louder, more insistent. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led somewhere, that there was something she was meant to find. She rounded a corner, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of her own heartbeat echoed in her ears, drowning out everything else. She could feel the blood rushing through her veins, her pulse quickening with each step. The air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive, as she moved deeper into the basement. She could barely see a few feet in front of her, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. And that's when she saw her, a figure standing in the darkness, barely visible in the dim light. Lydia's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening in shock. She took a step back, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure was small, almost childlike, and it seemed to be watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, stood facing the wall. Her silhouette was barely visible in the dim light, but Lydia could see the outline of her small frame. The girl didn't move, didn't make a sound, as if she were frozen in place. Lydia's mind raced, trying to understand what she was seeing. Was this real, or was her mind playing tricks on her? Her long dark hair cascaded down her back, almost obscuring her face. The hair was tangled and unkempt, as if it hadn't been brushed in years. Lydia could see the faint outline of the girl's face through the strands of hair, but it was shrouded in shadow. She felt a pang of sadness, wondering what had happened to this child, why she was here in this dark, forgotten place. She was wearing a faded blue dress, the kind popular in old photographs. The fabric was worn and tattered, the color faded with age. It looked out of place in the modern world, a relic of a bygone era. Lydia couldn't help but wonder how long the girl had been here, trapped in this basement. The dress seemed to tell a story of its own, a story of loss and forgotten memories. Lydia's breath hitched in her throat. She felt a wave of fear wash over her, her body trembling with a mix of terror and curiosity. She wanted to reach out, to touch the girl, to see if she was real, but something held her back, a deep-seated fear that she couldn't quite explain. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out, but she stopped herself, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the girl was not alive. The realization hit her like a cold wave, sending a shiver down her spine. The girl's presence was otherworldly, a ghostly figure trapped between worlds. Lydia felt a deep sense of sorrow, a longing to help the girl find peace. But she also knew that she was in over her head, that this was something beyond her understanding. She took a step back, her mind racing with questions, as the girl's figure began to fade into the shadows. Pause 2S. I bet you didn't know the house's secrets begin to unravel as the night deepens and the shadows grow longer. The air is thick with tension, and every creak of the floorboard sends shivers down the spine. Lydia's encounter in the basement has left her shaken, but she knows she must press on. The house seems to breathe around her, its walls whispering tales of a forgotten past. Pause 3S. She ascends the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The once familiar hallway now feels alien, the shadows cast by the moonlight playing tricks on her eyes. She reaches the top and pauses, her breath hitching as she hears a faint rhythmic tapping coming from the end of the corridor. The sound is almost hypnotic, drawing her towards it. Pause 3S. Lydia walks cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The tapping grows louder, more insistent, as if it is beckoning her. She reaches a door she has never noticed before, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seem to shift and change in the dim light. Her hand hovers over the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before she turns it. Pause 3S. The door swings open with a soft creak, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The air inside is stale, filled with the scent of old paper and dust. Shelves line the walls, overflowing with books and trinkets from another era. In the center of the room stands a large antique desk, its surface cluttered with yellowed documents and faded photographs. A single candle flickers on the desk, casting long shadows that dance across the walls. Pause 3S. Lydia steps inside, her eyes drawn to the photographs. They depict the house in its prime, filled with life and laughter. But as she examines them closer, she notices something unsettling. In each photograph, there is a figure standing in the background, barely noticeable but always present. A figure with long dark hair and a faded blue dress. Pause 3S. Her heart races as she realizes the figure is the same girl from the basement, the same haunting presence that called her name. She feels a chill run down her spine, the weight of the house's history pressing down on her. The photographs tell a story of a family once whole, now torn apart by tragedy. The girl, a silent witness to it all, trapped between worlds. Pause 3S. As Lydia sifts through the documents on the desk, she uncovers letters and diary entries that reveal the dark history of the house. Tales of loss, betrayal, and sorrow etched into the very fabric of the walls. She reads of a family torn asunder by grief, a young girl lost to time, and a house that holds their secrets in its silent embrace. Pause 3S. The tapping sound returns, louder now, coming from beneath the floorboards. Lydia drops the documents, her eyes widening in fear. She kneels down, her hands trembling as she pries open a loose floorboard. Beneath it, she finds a small, dusty box. She opens it cautiously, revealing a collection of old weathered toys and a locket. Pause 3S. Inside the locket is a photograph of the young girl, her eyes filled with a sadness that seems to reach out from the past. Lydia feels tears welling up in her eyes, a deep sense of empathy for the lost child. She knows now that the girl's spirit is bound to the house, trapped by the weight of her unfinished story. Pause 3S. Lydia stands, clutching the locket to her chest. She feels a resolve building within her, a determination to help the girl find peace. The shadows may linger, but she knows that she must face them, uncover the truth, and set the spirit free. The house's secrets are dark and haunting, but they also hold the key to redemption. Pause 3S. As she leaves the room, the candle flickers and goes out, plunging the room into darkness. But Lydia feels a glimmer of hope, a sense that she is not alone in her quest. The shadows may be long, but they are not insurmountable. She takes a deep breath and steps back into the hallway, ready to face whatever comes next. Pause 2S. The night is far from over, and the house still holds many secrets. But Lydia is no longer afraid. She knows that she is on the right path, and that the truth, no matter how dark, will ultimately bring light to the shadows. The journey is just beginning, and the house's secrets are waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of mystery and suspense. Your support helps us uncover more stories and bring them to light. Thank you for watching.